So we've talked in other videos and newsletters about the idea of pull incentives. And as a recap, pull incentive that we hope to create in the future and are creating now will be an agreed price at which a government buys an antibiotic to have it available over an extended period of time. And it's viewed as a purchase akin to a fire extinguisher. We're buying fire treatment equipment and having it available in advance of the fire breaking out in the ICU. I want to be able to treat those infections, not let them spread throughout my hospital. And we're talking about reasonably large sums of money. The general estimate is that the global value of a good new antibiotic to society is somewhere north of $2 billion, somewhere closer actually to $4 billion for a really, really, really good one. $4 billion paid over about 10 years is an amount that would actually create a level economic playing field for new companies in the antibiotic space. And the challenge then becomes, which antibiotics are you going to buy? Because they're not all going to be worth the same. And this is where you get into the issue of choosing your R&D project in order to earn the largest possible reward. And one way to think about this idea of choosing projects is to recognize that R&D, antibiotic drug R&D in general, is a really long multi-year process. It's a 10 to 15 year long ship that we turn by telling people where we ultimately want it to go. So how do you choose your projects? Well, here I'm reminded of a favorite story out of a movie, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, in which Indiana, Harrison Ford, and his father, Sean Connery, are in search of the Holy Grail, and at the end of the movie they actually find it. They find the room where it is, and this is the key to the story. They arrive in this room that's full of cups, and the Holy Grail is one of 50 cups scattered around the room, all kinds of different options there. And the knight who they meet in this room says to them,
"You must choose, but choose wisely."
So the bad guys who are hot on the tail of Indiana and his dad, without spending a lot of time thinking about it, they look around the room and they say, "That one looks really shiny. I'll take it." They drink from it and they die. As the knight says,
"He chose poorly."
So what we want to do is do what Indiana does. He thinks carefully about it. He looks around the room and he says, a cup from 2,000 years ago, it's not going to be a shiny, spiffy thing. It's actually going to be this really simple, unassuming one. This is the one that I need.
You have chosen wisely.
Fun story about the theme of taking your time, thinking carefully, and choosing wisely. So what's the equivalent of that for antibiotic developers? Well, assuming that the targets are going to be held constant, and I think that's something we as a community need to be communicating to everybody. The best constant targets are pure science features that you can bake into the drug at the time that you make your choice. There's some articles about that, a particular newsletter I'd encourage you to read. And I think an example is really helpful. So let's look at the UK pilot scheme, where they have laid out a point scoring scheme for the antibiotics that they want to purchase. And the point scoring scheme was used to both help choose the antibiotics and to decide how much of the notional up to 10 million pounds a year that they were willing to pay that antibiotic would get. And we have yet to see exactly how it plays out in terms of the two antibiotics that have been selected for the pilot. But you can look at the point scoring scheme here and get an idea of the kinds of things that the NHS pilot is saying, these are valuable. This increases your value as a fire extinguisher. So what pathogens do you cover? The priority pathogen list put out by the WHO or potentially the CDC and other schemes. How many of those pathogens do you cover? How well do you demonstrate the use in various kinds of care settings? Is it novel? I think it's an interesting one. They've actually put in some points for novel mechanism, novel target. These are things that in theory would reduce the rate of development of resistance. So think about these point scoring schemes as you're making choices about your projects. Another example we have is in the U.S. with the Pasteur Act, which was introduced in 2020 in the 116th Congress, and we think it's about to be reintroduced in the 117th Congress. And it says that the U.S. is going to buy antibiotics that are valuable for between $750 million and $3 billion spread out over 10 years. So what's going to make a valuable antibiotic for the United States? Well, we don't have a list yet, but the wording in the Pasteur Act, at least as we saw it at the end of last year, was about characteristics that incentivize development, and we're going to convene a committee who are going to think this through and lay out the grid that we want. And if you think about it, the grid's got to look a lot like what the UK has put out. There are only so many choices. People who've reviewed this area, you keep coming back to the same list of features that are really strong, clear, and obvious to everybody. And so I encourage you, if you want to dig into that, look at the Rothery paper. That is actually the underpinning of the UK scheme, and also look at the paper that Kevin and I wrote, where we laid out a quite simple point scoring scheme that pointed at these kinds of ideas. You'll also want to look at what other countries are starting to experiment with. So Sweden, for example, is focusing on supply security, and right now has put out a really simple scheme that says we'll pay basically $500,000 a year for antibiotics that are newly registered in Sweden. And they've got to meet some certain characteristics, but it's a simple scheme, and it's really just talking about novel mechanisms coming to the market. $500,000 a year isn't enough to cover the innovation value of an antibiotic. As we discussed elsewhere, the innovation reward has to be in the range of $2 to $4 billion over 10 years in order to pay back all the effort that went into the new antibiotic. But the Swedish scheme actually could be scaled up pretty easily to buy more innovative antibiotics for a greater value. And then there's a recent policy brief out of the EU JAMRAI project, where the discussion, the point of the policy brief was a discussion with 13 countries, 10 in Europe and then Japan, Canada, and South Africa, about what they thought about pull incentives. And 11 of the 13 said that they saw the value for pull incentives, but all of them said, we're not quite sure how to decide how much to pay. And and that concept feeds back into everything that we've just been talking about. People are going to be more willing to pay for stuff when they can really see the concrete value. Think about how you decide to go buy a new phone or a new car. I mean, you want to look at the list of features and say, well, if I pay a little bit more, I can have this extra thing. And I think that's the message for all of us, is that we need to be having some really clear and transparent conversations about what you can put into an antibiotic in terms of data. But as an R&D developer who wants to work in this space, I think you can plan for certain things that are definitely going to be there. Novelty, spectrum are things that they just have to be part of the value argument. So when you think about choosing wisely, think about Indiana Jones, In the Cave, Last Crusade, Pick the Cup. These are the themes that I think will make a difference in the future. And you can, once you've baked in the fact that your drug is oral and covers ESBLs of a certain category, nobody can ever take that away from you. And that has an intrinsic value that is going to be something people are willing to pay for. So, pull incentives, scoring schemes, study what's going on right now, because I think it predicts the future, and choose wisely. I hope you enjoyed that. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.